Madam Speaker, at this point, I'm going to represent Representative Suozzi, who was a key person in getting this legislation moving through the House of Representatives. I would yield him 3 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of Sami's law. Congressman Smith and I introduced this legislation to address passenger safety issues with transportation network companies, TNCs, such as Uber and Lyft. And I'd like to thank Congressman Smith again for his tireless advocacy on this issue. And I'd also like to thank Chairman DeFazio. There's no way this would have made it to the floor unless he had worked together with House leadership to get this bipartisan and common sense legislation on the floor. It's a tremendous challenge to determine what policies are necessary to ensure that the new industry of transportation network companies, TNCs, provides safe, efficient, and cost-effective solutions to consumers and employees. Earlier this year, when news reports surfaced about the tragic, horrific death of Sami Josephson, a friend of mine who's also a friend and neighbor of the Josephson family contacted me to work on legislation to ensure that no other parent would experience the devastating loss of a child in the way that the Josephsons did. I later discovered that Congressman Smith, who represents the Josephsons, was also working on the issue. Sami Josephson called for an Uber, entered the wrong car, and was murdered. The Smith-Suozzi legislation to provide consumers with a level of safety before entering a vehicle. Our bill's safety provisions are common sense and easy to implement, including the following requirements. 1, requiring companies like Uber and Lyft to connect with passengers and drivers to positively establish their identities before the trip starts. 2, prohibiting the unauthorized sale of rail hiding signs and spells out civil penalties of violating the law. 3, establishing an advisory council comprised of representatives from federal agencies, TNCs, law enforcement, disability and advocacy groups to recommend standards for positive identification systems. As we began researching this issue, I was surprised to learn that TNCs, a relatively new business model, are regulated differently across states and local borders. While some states and cities, such as New York City, have implemented new rules, such as creating a new license category for high volume for hire services, TNCs have been mostly left to create their own policies for preventing and tracking violence or abuse to their passengers. We've all heard about the horrific reports of assault and abuse incidents involving both TNC passengers and drivers. That's why our bill also requires a Government Accountability Office study on the prevalence of assault and abuse perpetrated on riders by TNC drivers of ride-hailing vehicles and on TNC drivers by passengers. This data will be instrumental in determining any other safety procedures that may be necessary to ensure the safety of everyone who uses a ride-sharing app. There's no way to describe the sadness, the horror, the pain that Sami's death caused for her family and to her community. She lived a vibrant and loving life. She had her whole life ahead of her. She planned to study law, she had hopes, she had dreams. We must do everything we can to prevent what happened to Sami and so many others from happening to anyone else. And I encourage my colleagues to support this critical, common sense legislation, and I yield back.